This video carefully walks you through a future fit business benchmark use case story. Now, it's important to note that this story is fictitious, but it's 100% achievable even today based on the great work and foundations that have been laid down to date. This story, I've chosen Frederick Industries, which is a fictitious company that manufactures conduit and tubing. This tubing is used in things like heat exchangers, water pipes and sprinkler systems inside buildings, and even structural members of scaffolding or buildings. Now, Frederick is an outstanding organization. Their shop floor has award-winning layouts, safety procedures, and so forth. As you can see, it's an energy-extensive, high-polluting business, and all the work they've done to have a great shop floor is only part of their story. Several years ago, Cindy Lee joined Frederick as a freshly graduated mechanical engineer, and she took on responsibility for buying and maintaining all the production equipment as well as that shop floor layout that we just looked at. About a year after joining Frederick, she attended a conference in which the Future Fit for Business benchmark was introduced, and she was smitten. See, she was concerned about things like employee safety and wellness in such a difficult environment. Obviously, there's a lot of effluents they need to deal with, both with the rolling operations, but also galvanizing and other activities. She's also worried about the extensive transportation costs and related pollution involved in getting products to their customer sites. And then finally, about some of the customer applications and installation. Now, a year later, Frederick has a working Future Fit scorecard that gives them weekly, monthly, quarterly information about their progress towards Future Fit. And that information is cascaded down to the departments, teams, and even individual levels on things like their smartphone app. They've also linked it into their reward system, including things like badges, leaderboards, awards, barbecue dinners, and so forth. This story is how they came to build their scorecard using some internal teams and some external experts. Now, they began the journey with extensive education. After Cindy was first exposed to Future Fit, she downloaded the various papers, worksheets, documents, and even managed to find Bob's master slide set. In addition, they regularly presented some of the different YouTubes out there on Future Fit to educate their broader teams. It was at this point that Frederick Industries got deeply involved with the natural step. They understood that they needed outside help to educate the senior leadership team and the various scorecard teams to develop their skill set and understand the benefits of sustainability. So at this point, they rolled into phase 1, which had the natural step helping the senior leadership team understand the value of their strategic commitment to sustainability and how this is likely to help them both perform in the community, but also gain customer credibility, drive innovation, and employee engagement. After a series of training sessions, the leadership team was fully engaged and authorized proceeding with building the Future Fit scorecard. They then undertook the 4-step process to develop their Future Fit scorecard. First off, we have to get the big picture right, what we call the corporate scorecard. Think of this as the top-level scorecard for the overall organization. What we're going to do is take a look at the 21 Future Fit business benchmark goals and determine which ones are appropriate for this business, how important are they, and how close can we get to the actual indicators recommended within the Future Fit benchmark framework. Now, in many cases, that data is not available. It's important that we're not held ransom for that data, so we will use indicators which approximate where we want to go to, but are at least available now, and we can move forward with better indicators in the future if we need to. Here, a simple example. Think of your car. If your gas gauge is broken, in effect, you probably don't want to use your car because you could run out of gas. But you could use your odometer instead. Your odometer isn't exactly accurate as your gas gauge is, but it's good enough. You might know you have 300 liters in your tank of gas, and so you can fill up, at 280 before you hit empty. Not as good as the gas gauge, but good enough you can keep using the asset. That's an indicator. At the corporate scorecard, we have to compromise and use indicators so that we have an immediately available scorecard. Now, from there, the next logical step is to make sure our initiatives are aligned to the performance gaps that we see. In other words, if we use the corporate scorecard, we'll identify gaps between our current performance level and what we need to achieve future fit, or even this year's goals towards future fit. And again, a metaphor. Think of a student who's in grade 10. Yes, we want that person to get through university eventually. And we're going to measure their ability to achieve university grade mathematics. But when they're grade 10, we probably want to also compare against what's expected within grade 10 and maybe within grade 11. So the idea is it's the same journey, but we're going to chunk it down to what we need to get done in the near term. And then based on that, identify the appropriate projects to take us to that next milestone. So the initiative alignment makes sure the work we're doing takes us towards that longer term goal while achieving the shorter near term goals. The next step from there is what we call the drill down, the operational scorecard. Taking the corporate scorecard high level measures, think of a 30,000 foot view, and dropping it down to 20,000 feet, giving us less scope but more specific detail around the things we need to do. So what we do is we take those future fit performance goals and drill them down to the department, team, and individual level. In this case, we're also going to take a look at our supply chain and our customer chain to measure their performance against those objectives as well. Now, in theory, if we were building that corporate scorecard, if we wanted to, we could bypass the initiatives and go straight down and work on the operational scorecard. So I have the big picture view and then the drill down view. The next step is to take that operational scorecard and actually change how we manage the business. The metaphor here is, even if we buy a better set of golf clubs, our game might not improve until we get some coaching on how to swing those clubs better. So management practices talk about establishing the management practices that make future fit sustainable. We need it to be self-rewarding so that it creates enough benefit it will maintain itself. Or to phrase it another way, the future fit scorecard has to give back more benefits to the organization than the cost it takes to maintain it. And so we need to make sure that how we use that enables greater successes. So the management practices are about that cadence of ongoing meetings, a conversation about supporting, resourcing, and reprioritizing continuously to make sure that we're moving towards those future fit goals. Now, just like before, if we wanted to, we could skip the operational scorecard. Straight from initiatives, we could go down and begin shifting our management practices. Or in fact, if you needed to, you could go straight from the corporate scorecard and straight into management practices. So these arrows on the left reflect how we can step into this at the pace and sequence that's appropriate for each organization. And that pace and sequence is going to be set by the organization, its culture, its stakeholders, key issues it's dealing with at that moment. And the trick to this scorecard framework is to understand it's a puzzle. I can put in any piece at any point in time. Eventually I build out the full story. So that's a quick walkthrough of what the 4 steps look like. In terms of the pacing, some organizations can go through this in as quickly as 4 weeks. Some take 4 months, some 4 quarters. The issue has to do with where the starting point is and the level of quality to which they need to achieve in order to gain success. This is also an iterative process. As you use it, your scorecards get better and better over time. And so some organizations think about building this out literally over a 4-day workshop and use that as the starting point to continuously learn and improve as they go forward. So let's take a look at how Frederick took on that first step of building the corporate level future fit scorecard. Now again, they went back to the natural step and this time engaged them to help out with phase 2, which is taking a look at how the organization captures value. So working with the natural step experts, they help develop their future fit vision and their strategic goals. And from that began to understand and pick up measures around their current baseline and their readiness. And this is what fed into the corporate level scorecard. They took the Future Fit 21 goals and assessed them for which ones pertain to their industry and situation. In this case, they felt that both the tax is paid in the right place at the right time and lobbying doesn't undermine the pursuit of future fitness. Both didn't pertain to them because A, they've only got one location and they make a point of paying their taxes, and secondly, they're deeply involved with local government and make sure that they're above ground on lobbying and related issues. So they've taken those and given them a weighting of 0. Now, ultimately, these future fit goals add up to 100%. These, of course, are 0. So then they took a look at which ones do they have the biggest impact on. And so they were concerned about environmental issues. They're concerned about emissions. They were concerned about greenhouse gases, byproducts, and so forth. So these, as they weighted them, ended up being their higher weighted objectives. Now, this priority setting is important to them to create alignment across the organization. The example they gave me that I thought was awesome is they said, well, if I have a son that wants to become an engineer, probably math is more important than art. So if my son came home with a C in art and a C in math, I'm going to be more concerned about that C in math. In other words, these things are not equally important. They have different priorities, and I need to take those into account as I take a look at my future fit activities. So then they took a look at the recommended indicators. So for example, energy is from renewable sources. The future fit indicator they could use immediately. They could tell how much energy they consume from renewable sources and how much total energy they consume. But they also want to put in some leading indicators. So they added in indicators like the number of clean energy initiatives they have proposed and underway. Those may not pay off for a year or two, but they're a leading indicator of their direction. In another area like health, employee health is safeguarded, again, they looked for available metrics they had, as they didn't have the recommended metrics inside of their future fit benchmark. Based on this, they're able to build their view of their corporate scorecard. They categorize their indicators by the key categories we use, and then within that, identified each of their measures, describe how they're performing, and even show the trend line of how that particular indicator has been performing over the last rolling 12 months. Now, they recognize that ultimately they want to chase down those future fit performance levels, but that's a long way off for them. They're setting up quarterly and annual targets which are achievable and set them on that direction. Building the second step is getting the initiatives lined up against corporate priorities and resources. What does that look like? Well, we should be able to take a look at the core activities. First off, we're going to be taking a look at the processes, those repeatable activities that go on day in, day out. And amongst those are things that we would recognize like sales and marketing, product development, manufacturing of the conduit, and so forth. They also include all of their supplier in one item and all of their customers in a second item. So the idea is they're covering the bow tie, their customers, themselves, and their suppliers. Now, in theory, these activities are done in support of these objectives. So we should be able to describe what is the impact of each of these processes on achieving this future fit goal. Let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. So what is the impact of sales and marketing on our ability to maintain energies from renewable sources? Well, they travel a lot. They're out there in the field, so they have some impact. And so we're going to light that as a light gray. If we take a look at product development, what's product development's impact on energies from renewable sources? Well, obviously it's significant. So we give it a 5 out of 5, and it's a slightly darker gray. Now the mathematics are, this color is based on multiplying the impact by the weighting. So at 18 it's a light gray, at 30 it's a darker gray. If we take a look at the impact of sales and marketing on waters used in an environmentally responsible way, obviously no impact. Now if we take a look at product development, again a significant impact. Now this is black because it's 5 times 10 or 50, so it's a higher value. So if we begin to expand this out, we begin to identify where the key touch points are on our processes and impacts on future fit. In fact, if we take a look at the whole equation, we can see exactly where our biggest focus needs to be, where our second tranche of focus is, and then where we go in our third step. So this is the process ontology. In fact, we can take that process ontology a step farther. And it looks a bit like this. So let's explore this in a little bit more detail too. What we've said is, this is the impact from the previous slide that we looked at, the beginning of the ontology. Now we're going to scale how well we're performing each of those activities. So we'd give ourselves an F if we're doing fairly poorly, and an A if we're meeting expectations. So in this case, we can see that product development is meeting expectations on getting energy from renewable resources, but gave itself a C in environmentally responsible, and also a C in derived from sources that respect ecosystems. Now, as I mentioned on the math example, because this is a higher weighting, this C gives us a red color, indicating we should be paying attention to it. And this C is a yellow color, meaning we're off target, but can probably achieve that performance level with the resources we're given. So again, if we zoom back out and take a look at the total sheet, we can begin to see patterns emerging. There are some of these goals which it look like are fairly achievable, but there's others. For example, if we take a look at this process, systems, supply value streams, we'll see our suppliers are deplorable. We really do need to work on our upstream supplier network to help them become more future fit. Again, we would not have seen this before, but by prioritizing our goals, by setting our impacts and scoring the performance, we begin to uncover this invisible stuff. Or horizontally. For example, if we take a look at customers are informed, well, we're unlikely to achieve that goal either, because most of those objectives are performing below our expected levels. So in this way, we begin having that conversation about where our initiative should be. In fact, because these are just numbers, what we can actually do is add up across them and graph it. And what that would look like is a chart that looks like this. So the total height of the bar represents the amount of process support we need to achieve that future fit target level for this period. The blue part and the gold part are as follows. The blue part represents how well we're currently performing, and the gold part represents the gap between current performance and what our strategy calls for. So now this chart begins to show us where the biggest gaps are, where there are no gaps, where there's small gaps. And so this creates alignment across the leadership team about our future fit readiness and where we should be focusing our projects. So we can take a look at projects. Now, in this case study, we're only going to look at 4. Let's suggest that Frederick has proposed creating a secondary water treatment facility, installing more solar panels, getting a heat recovery system from their various machines, and then finally improving what they provide to their customers through a website. Again, we can score those based on resources required and impact across those goals. Now, in theory, of course, we're doing these projects in order to address those gold bars, the gaps. So again, if we charted these scores as red dots, we would see that, for example, we have lots of projects which are going to address energies from renewable sources, and none, for example, related to emissions. So remember, we're trying to close these gaps with those projects. So let's combine these two charts. And what that looks like is this. And this is a fairly typical footprint for us, where in some cases we find that we're over allocating resources, and in other cases significantly under allocating resources. So this is where we create the alignment. In our average client, about 60% of the projects go away because they're misaligned or they're not focused on the right things. Once we've been through this process, we now know our initiatives will be aligned to our future fit goals. The next step is creating that future fit operational scorecard. Think of this as like the next level down or the drill down. So we can go back to the ontology, because obviously the darker the space, the higher urgency there is for getting indicators. So in this case, our first pass needs to have great indicators at least in these three areas. But we're also going to try to tackle all of the dark gray areas. Now eventually we want to move on to the light gray areas, but that took about 6 months to occur at Frederick. Now the indicators are similar to what we had before. So again, remember we had this overall energies from renewable resources, but we're now using the future fit business benchmark framework to create the drill down. So the drill down here is what are our management practices versus the outcomes. And if we take a look at management practices, we take a look at what policies we have in place, sort of the early lead indicator, and then what processes we have in place. And eventually, if those occur, we're going to begin to see some outcomes. So on policies, we're just going to measure the number of clean energy policies we have and score it against our current target. For processes, we're going to take a look at the number of processes which mandate clean energy, both from ourselves but also from customers and suppliers. And we're going to score ourselves on that. And then we can aggregate that up to how we're doing in our management practices. In terms of outcomes, we're looking at both proportional outcomes and elimination. And the proportional outcomes are just, in this case, the percentage of renewable energy. But the elimination is the absolute measure of how many carbon tons we've eliminated. And again, we score ourselves, give us the aggregated score, and therefore can give us the overall score. So this begins to give us a drill down so management and teams can drill into it. Now, if we wanted to go into more detail on, say, elimination, we might want to split that out further to fossil fuels versus alternative energies versus renewable, and so forth. The idea is this is an impact diagram that shows how these things impact going up that hierarchy. We're trying to keep within the future fit business benchmark. In fact, what we'll be doing is providing best practice indicators and reminders for organizations to shop a la carte to quickly get themselves up to speed. What we end up with is something like this. So this is the view from the desktop where we can see things like on the employee health and safety, how we've been scoring, how we're doing in the various milestones related to this, and even some of the projects that we have underway to improve employee safety. Now, there's a plethora of different reports that are available from this data, and the idea is to create reports, screens, and even that handheld app that are useful for the culture and communication inside each Future Fit client. Then Frederick moved on to modifying their management practices. They recognized that they needed to begin doing business differently. Again, they took on the natural step, and this time to help them out with phase 3. How do we embed sustainability into our organization? And use the experts at the natural step to help them sort out their new governance and leadership practices and timing, sort out what are the products and services they should be offering and continuing to use, reestablishing a future fit business culture inside the organization, and began to align their brand and brand communications around the future fit ideas. So there are ongoing meetings where departments and teams meet on a regular basis, weekly and monthly, based on their drumbeat. And they report on their progress, they look for ideas amongst the team, they look for support on their decision making, and most importantly, capacity to achieve those goals. So there's a fair amount of cross-functional communication that goes on an ongoing basis. Most employees tell us that these are in fact the most exciting meetings that they have all month long, because they walk away with a huge feeling of purpose and contribution to themselves, society, the environment, and that feeling of accomplishment that comes from knowing you've done good. The executive meets on a monthly basis, and they monitor the overall progress, and they allocate resources based on the initiatives and the reprioritization that has to happen on an ongoing basis. They also run quarterly all-hands meetings where employees like Cindy take people through the story of what's happened, the progress they've made. They hand out awards, recognize employees and teams, and so forth. And interestingly enough, the highest used Frederick Industries app, other than of course their quotation and pricing app, is their Future Fit app. They've also handed out over 127 badges to employees. They've won 7 awards from the municipality, industry, and associations, and have actually given out 45 barbecue dinners for outstanding performance. Cindy herself has become proud of the work that she's done and how she's helped Frederick progress. In fact, she's become an evangelist for Future Fit within her local community, within the Mechanical Engineers Association, and the industry associations that Frederick belongs to. Frederick itself has seen a significant increase in business. Now, in truth, they don't know if that's caused by the increased employee engagement and morale that's happened because of Future Fit, or because customers recognize the great things they're doing, or the better business practices that have come through the Future Fit initiative. Now, a reminder, this story is fictitious, but it's 100% achievable based on the work that we have available and completed already. We look forward to having this discussion with you in London.